say welcome. Welcome to Denver, Colorado, to my beautiful, beautiful state. Welcome to all of you. This is going to be an incredible dinner this evening. I'm so looking forward to everything and hearing from some of my heroes tonight. And this is simply the ongoing work of the foundation. And the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and our foundation is here preserving and promoting the core values of who we are as criminal defense lawyers. Not just as private attorneys, not just as public defenders, not just as indigent defense counsel, but all of who we are as criminal defense lawyers. You know, when I was thinking of what I was going to say tonight, I had a hard time, but I want to start with the very easy part. The easy part for me is that none of this could have happened, this beautiful setting, this just remarkable place and this gathering of all the people that are here without the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyer staff. We have the best staff in the country. And I know that because I get to see staff in other places and I travel around. We have the very best staff in the country. And this could not have been possible without all of you. And so that's the first thing I want to say is acknowledge the staff. Thank you so much. Secondly, I want to say thank you to the Dinner Planning Committee, because without you, we could not have done this as well. And so the Denver Planning Committee, which I was the chair, but we have Tim Evans from Fort Worth, Texas. I think Tim is, where is Tim? Okay, raise your hand, Tim. Marcy Gilligan from Denver with Ridley, raise your hand. She hates that, but raise your hand, Mars. Okay. Jim Levine from Houston, Texas. Where are you, Jim? Okay, there he is. Gerry Morris, our incoming president from Texas. Cynthia Orr, who, you know, the girl made it here in a wheelchair and is always here for us. And last but not least, our president, Ted Simon. Without all the work, you have no idea. We talked on the phone every Tuesday for the last, year, talking about how we were going to do this, the money that we needed to raise, the effort and our goals here, and it took a lot. And so without you all, we could not be here. So again, thank you very much. So when I was thinking about what I was going to say, and I'm going back and forth with Norman, and I'm like, I want to make sure that the message is right. The reality is this, is that there's a lot of things that are going on in our world that I would be remiss not to talk about, because it affects me to my deepest core, and I know that it affects you. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And that's a saying that, Martin Luther King talked to us about, and that seems appropriate for where we are. A lot of people think progress and change are slow, but we are in a moment of explosive change in this country. We are on the brink, I believe, of huge changes that not only in the criminal justice system, but in our world. It's explosive change from the streets to the courtroom. It goes from police brutality to the movement Black Lives Matter. It's from the 1994 Crime Bill Act to the Clemency Project, to reducing prison population, to the criminal justice reform in this country. Lastly, to me, the role of counsel, indigent defense counsel, court-appointed counsel, counsel that is making that courtroom a fair place for our clients. We are at the brink of change. And for many of us, the world is like turning upside down. And I say that because To Kill a Mockingbird sent a lot of us to different places. Am I right? I mean, when the new book came out, everybody was like, what? What are you talking about? That wasn't about what we thought it was about in terms of inspiring us. And it inspired a number of us in this room, and I know it did. And the Atticus Finch and the person that he was in that book is still an inspiration in many ways. But you know what? When I look around this room, I know what the true inspiration is for the group that's in this room. And you know what that was? The inspiration for us is who was Tom Robinson, right? Tom Robinson was the defendant in that case. And that's what really appealed and inspired the people that are in this room. And I know that that goes to our core values and it goes to the mission of this foundation. So my words to you all is, because we're going to have a lot of inspiration. I think a lot of people are going to be moved to tears tonight. But what I really want to tell you is that this foundation is standing for the things that are important to our core values, the Tom Robinsons, the racial disparity issues, the police brutality that's going on, the militarization of our police. These are all things that this foundation had the vision to be behind years ago before it became the popular thing. We were there, we've been there, we're the voice for all the criminal bar, and we always will be. Thank you, and this is to Tom Robinson. I now get to introduce one of my heroes, Gerald Lefcourt. Love you.
So before I say anything, I just want to shout out to some of the people who have supported us tonight in a big way. And they are the Guardians of Justice, who are the highest level of supporters: Stacy and Joel Hawk, Sidley Austin Foundation, and Haddon, Morgan, and Foreman. And thank you. So I'm very happy tonight to hear an old friend come up here, and that's Michael Tiger. Because when we were young pups just starting to practice, we were driven by a desire to end racism, war, and poverty, and we were activists, and both of us were counsel in a case called the Chicago 8. And as counsel, we fought what we thought was the fight of that century, and indeed that trial may have been the trial of the century, because I'm not aware of any other trial that had hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in the streets on a regular basis. And when Michael and I started in that case, one of the defendants was the chairman of the Black Panther Party by the name of Bobby Seale. The government picked 8 leaders and put them all together. This was almost the first act of John Mitchell in the Nixon Department of Justice. And Bobby Seale had a great Oakland attorney by the name of Charles R. Gerry. And Charles Gerry, who had represented the Black Panthers from the beginning and was counsel to Seale, needed a gallbladder operation. So even though the indictment was in April and the trial date was set immediately, almost immediately, for September, when Charles Gerry made an application to push the case off a month or so he could have an operation, Judge Julius Hoffman said no and forced Bobby Seale to come to Chicago without counsel. And the government, realizing that they had a defendant who was going to demand to represent himself, said, what about those other lawyers? And sure enough, Judge Hoffman ordered Michael Tiger, myself, 2 other lawyers, Dennis Roberts, who's sitting in the back over there, and Michael Kennedy, to represent Seale. Seale had his lawyer, Charles Gerry, and he wanted Charles Gerry because Charles Gerry was somebody that was close to the upper echelon of the Black Panther Party. But the judge said no. And so we did the only honorable thing we could do, and that is to refuse the court order. That led to a contempt and us being thrown in a cell together. In that cell was Bobby Seale, the chairman of the Black Panther Party, Jerry Rubin, who was serving a sentence for some demonstration case, and Michael and I. And we sang, you get a little drunk and you land in jail. But on a whole other level, this was an outrageous and serious act. And it was a Friday afternoon and too late for anybody to run to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals and get us out. But the Seventh Circuit, on their own, ordered us out. An amazing event, if you think about it. And when I flew to New York, when I got to my home at about midnight that Friday night, Abby Hoffman was on the phone and he said, "I've called the press conference for tomorrow." And I said, "Michael and I are going to be sentenced on Monday. What do you think I'm going to be saying?" He said, "We'll figure it out." Well, we did figure it out. We announced, wrongly, falsely, that lawyers from all over the country were so outraged at what Judge Hoffman had done that they were coming to Chicago to protest on Monday morning. By that time, the government lost the media, and that press conference played. And Monday morning, hundreds of lawyers surrounded the federal courthouse, including a petition from the Harvard Law School faculty. And Judge Hoffman backed down. So in your programs, in the first cover, there is a picture. And this picture is of the four lawyers. That was the front page of the New York Times. Dennis Roberts to the far left, Michael Tiger, myself, and Michael Kennedy slamming the government for what they did to us. So I'm very proud that Michael is here tonight. So, you know, in a recent poll with 2.3 million people in jail in this country, the highest per capita in the world, a recent poll found 54% of Republicans believed in reducing prison population, 71% of independents, and 81% of Democrats. So from the Koch industries, who are sitting here at this table, a representative, to Hillary Clinton, there is now agreement that our prison population is obscene. It reminds me of my favorite Winston Churchill quote. He said, "You can always count on Americans to do the right thing, but first after they've tried everything else." And so your support of this foundation, which is a tax-exempt organization with great benefits for us, is crucial in the fight for criminal justice reform on so many levels. For the past 8 years, the foundation has vastly expanded the efforts to promote criminal justice reform, covering a vast array of issues: sentencing, grand jury reform, addressing racial disparity, and collateral consequences of convictions, from over-criminalization to unlawful surveillance, from body cameras to Brady and discovery reform, from preserving privacy in the digital age to promoting clemency for this massive incarceration. So we are one of the founders of the largest pro bono effort ever undertaken by the legal profession, Clemency 2014. And we truly believe that there will be thousands of people freed, and we're working towards that goal. And NACDL was a pioneer in reaching across the aisle to other groups to promote common interests and reform of the criminal justice system. And our trailblazing report with the Heritage Foundation on the evisceration of criminal intent in statutes was a defining moment. It is largely because of NACDL's advocacy that there now is an emerging consensus that the criminal justice system is broke. In the most partisan era that any of us have seen in Congress, we are witnessing a giant shift with respect to criminal justice. Systemic problems none of us ever thought we would see addressed are now attracting the attention across the ideological spectrum, from overly harsh sentences and a trial penalty for insisting on trial, from prosecutorial misconduct to forfeiture, from grand jury abuse to junk science, from indigent defense reform to bail reform. There is a moving consensus. Just recently, the Senate Judiciary held its first ever meeting on the right to counsel for the indigent poor defendants who are charged with misdemeanors. A meeting convened by Senator Chuck Grassley, a Republican, who said, quote, "These constitutional violations cause serious repercussions. It hurts defendants, it hurts the economy, it hurts all of us." Whoever thought that that would be uttered by the Republican chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate? Obviously, we're not going to win all these battles. We have a long road to travel. But we are in the fight for the long haul, because change really can happen. And because as criminal defense lawyers, we don't give up. And that is the reason the Foundation deserves the support of every single person who has ever witnessed or been touched by the injustice of America's criminal justice system. So together, somehow, some way, we will find that hidden path to what we outwardly have prized but never really obtained: equal justice under law. Enjoy your dinner.
Gerry Morris, our incoming president, the kindest, most gentle. I'm so happy you're our next president. He is so, and where are all my Texas folks that came up here to support Gerry? Yeah. I just love you.
Good evening, friends. The theme of tonight's program is privacy in the digital age. Largely through the revelations of Edward Snowden, we've learned just how far the technology has gone and how far the will of the government has gone to intrude into our daily lives. NACDL has positioned itself in the forefront of advocacy on these issues. These are issues that I've been particularly involved in on behalf of NACDL in the last few years. Gerry Goldstein and I have been co-chair of the Fourth Amendment and Privacy Committee of NACDL. Some of the activities, some of the things that we've done to further the advocacy in this area have been reports issued by our committee on such things as drone surveillance. We have a web page on our website. We call it the drone page, where you can go and get information about the latest developments in litigation that's involved with drone surveillance. We've issued reports on digital searches. What sort of search warrant, what sort of limitations should be in a search warrant that limits the government's ability to search through all of your materials on your digital hard drive or in your cell phone when they only have probable cause for one particular issue. Our advocacy in Congress in this area has been impactful. Most recently, we were involved in the reauthorization of the Chapter 215 of the Patriot Act. It was limited somewhat. As you know, in 6 months or so, it's going to be severely cut back. We didn't get everything we wanted, but it certainly was a good step forward. Probably the most interesting thing we've done, the most impactful thing we've done this year is back in late April. NACDL sponsored a symposium that was held at American University Law School, where we brought together industry leaders in the high-tech fields, scholars who write and teach in the area of digital privacy, practitioners who told us how to approach motion practice in cases where this sort of technology is used, and maybe more importantly, how to discover if it is being used. That symposium was a big success. The conversation from that symposium started other conversations and raised the awareness, we think, of certainly the practitioners that tuned in, and also some of the news media that tuned in, about how pervasive the problem is. There is, the title of the keynote tonight is Surveillance, Snowden, and Us, Making the Fourth Amendment Live. And there is no better person that I can think of to deliver that message than Michael Tiger. I have the distinct honor of introducing Michael, but also the challenge. The challenge is there are so many things that I could say about Michael, so many things that I could tell you about what he's done in his career, that he wouldn't have any time left to talk if I included them all. So here's just a sampling. And a lot of this came from information that Michael sent me and things Michael said about himself, so I'm confident it's mostly true. After completing his undergraduate degree at University of California, Berkeley, he graduated from Berkeley Law School in 1966, where he was Order of the Coif and editor-in-chief of the California Law Review. He was hired by Justice William Brennan and drove across the country with his family. According to one thing I read, he had $10 in his pocket. Got to Washington, ready to take his job as Justice Brennan's clerk, and found out that Justice Brennan had changed his mind. Justice Brennan had been pressured, in his own words, greatly pressured by conservative columnists and none other than J. Edgar Hoover, because they were concerned about Michael's subversive activities, his leftist activities, while he was at Berkeley. He had had the audacity to openly oppose the House Un-American Activities Committee, attended a leftist youth conference in Helsinki, articulated support for the Cuban Revolution, and perhaps most damning, he had demonstrated against segregation. Justice Brennan asked for Michael's permission to release a list of his political activities, and Michael refused. So ended the shortest clerkship ever on the Supreme Court, and thus started one of the most celebrated legal careers in our time. Over the span of a career that included practicing for a time with Edward Bennett Williams and Connolly, where he was a partner for a time, with his own firm, with his partner Sam Buffone, and just simply, when I met him, as a Tiger law firm. His clients and the issues involved in their cases represent some of the most important litigation in the last almost 50 years. His clients have included Isabelle Letelier, the family of Roddy Moffett, many victims of the Pinochet repression, Angela Davis, H. Rap Brown, John Connolly, Kay Bailey Hutchinson, the Washington Post, Fantasy Films, Terry Nichols, Allen Ginsberg, Leonard Peltier, the Charleston Five, Service Employees International Union, Fernando Chavez, Carl Deesh Wolf, and Lynn Stewart. He's been chair of the 60,000 member section of litigation of the American Bar Association and chair of the board of directors of the Texas Resource Center for Capital Litigation. Apparently, there wasn't enough injustice in the United States to keep him busy, so he made several trips to South Africa, working with organizations of African lawyers engaged in the struggle to end apartheid. After the release of Nelson Mandela from prison, he went on to lecture on human rights issues and to advise the African National Congress on issues in drafting a new constitution. He's been actively involved in efforts to bring justice members of the Chilean junta, including former President Pinochet. He's been on the faculty, been tenured professor at American University, acting professor at law at UCLA, Justice Jamal Chair in law at the University of Texas, where we met, and lectured in dozens of law schools. He's co-authored 13 books, 3 plays, and scores of articles and essays. Justice Brennan, perhaps with a tinge of conscience over dismissing Michael so quickly, remarked in 1999 that Michael Tiger is one of his career is one of tireless striving for justice that stretches his arms towards perfection. And this is the coolest part of the introduction. I love this. We talked about some victories that Michael had. I'm going to talk about a third place finish that perhaps he might be pretty proud of. In 1999, the California Attorneys for Criminal Justice held a ballot for Lawyer of the Century. Tiger was third in the balloting, behind Clarence Darrow and Thurgood Marshall. And I don't know for sure, but I suspect it was a close vote. Michael?
Well, thank you. I appreciate the introduction. We as lawyers, I know I am, we're just massive blobs of ego suspended over a chasm of insecurity. And it's always good to hear that sort of thing. And I'm honored to be here tonight where Peter Goldberger, my friend, is going to be to get the award. And I'm honored to be here with my cellmates, cellmate Gerry Lefcourt, my friend Dennis Roberts. There's an irony here. The judge who enforced the contempt citation and the arrest warrant against me that sent me to Chicago was then District Judge Harry Pregerson, who is now United States Court of Appeals Judge Harry Pregerson. My son, 2 years ago, became United States District Judge for the Northern District of California and sat by designation with Harry Pregerson on the Ninth Circuit. And Judge Pregerson assured him that sending one tiger per generation to jail was enough, and that John didn't have to fear asking questions at oral argument or doing any of the other things. He could just do it. And I'm also glad to be here where we tried the Nichols case. That was an experience, and people have asked me, what about this tie? We collected our mail, Jane and I, at the little substation post office on Lincoln. And 3 weeks into jury selection, the postmistress gave me this tie, which I thought, gee, I guess they're reading the paper. And Hal Haddon is not here tonight. He's had surgery, but Hal and I had tried the previous bombing case that was tried in that courthouse. So it is good to be back here. My theme is this. A few months ago, I spoke to a group of lawyers in Los Angeles, and I talked to them about legal ethics. I mentioned Henry Drinker, author of ABA Ethical Rules, author of a book that was the basis for the 1955 Rules of Professional Responsibility, and a founder of the Drinker-Biddle firm. In noting the solipsistic nature of many ethical rules, I pointed out that in a 1927 speech to the ABA, Henry Drinker said that one of his biggest problems in enforcing legal ethics was, quote, keeping the Russian Jew boys out of the profession. When the floor was open for questions, a Drinker-Biddle partner, and himself an authority on ethics, criticized me for attacking Henry Drinker. We must remember, the questioner said, that he was the product of his time. And I thought to myself, what a miserable excuse. One of the worst things that could be said of anybody in this room is that he or she is the product of his or her time. How many times have we stood, how often have we stood beside some poor soul at sentencing and heard the judge intone a sentence that is simply a product of its time? And how often have we got some mindless letter from the appellate court that's simply the product of its time? I mean, whatever happened to the song lyric, "Oh, beautiful for patriot dreams that see beyond the years"? Some years ago, I was in South Africa, yes, during the apartheid period, and I picked up a magazine issued by a lawyers' association. I read there an editorial that said that lawyers have no duty to resist apartheid. Our job, they said, is to take the law as it is. Now, fortunately, there were many lawyers in South Africa who didn't subscribe to that view. No, we're advocates. Our job, our very reason for being, is to mediate between what is given and what is desired. Our job is to bridge the gap between our client's present fear and misery to a time when the client may receive something that merits the name justice. We do not have the luxury of being products of our time. As Angela Davis has said, we do not accept the things we cannot change. We struggle to change the things that we cannot accept. And so tonight I ask, what is our time this time? And what time should it be? This is a time of unprecedented invasion into the private lives, words, communications, and thoughts of almost every person in the world. This is a time when this surveillance and the technology of it seems beyond the reach of meaningful reform. John Oliver, the Comedy Central guy, sent reporters into Times Square a few months ago, and almost nobody who was interviewed remembered Edward Snowden and his path-breaking revelations. And for the most part, nobody cared much about all of this snooping. Well, not until the reporter pointed out that if for some reason you had sent somebody a picture of your genitals, the NSA could and would store that picture. That provoked outrage. What? They have a picture of my dick? Now, that's outrage. Now, that may say more about the male psyche than we have time to discuss this evening. And I know, some of us in the room voted for people who promised to take us out of the Bush era. And had we listened, we would know they did what they promised. The NSA. At last, we have a government agency that really listens to you. You know, Candidate Obama promised that whistleblowers should not be subject to reprisals. You remember that? And now you tell Ed Snowden and Julius Assange that, huh? Reminds me a little bit of Bill Clinton. Barack Obama once taught constitutional law, but I think he didn't inhale it. And the Congress of the United States, are they enforcing the Constitution? I don't think so. It is my proposal that all the members of the Congress should be replaced with undocumented aliens, because they'll do jobs that Americans won't. And so, it is left to us, the advocates, as it has always been, to move from this time to a time we can all describe. It's a difficult task. Look what's happened to Edward Snowden, who had the courage to reveal what NSA is doing. The word traitor was shouted from the ramparts of government, not only refusing to accept that Snowden had revealed wholesale constitutional violations, but reflecting an ignorance of the constitutional text that defines treason quite narrowly. The truth shall set you free? Maybe. But as the Nigerian poet Wole Soyinka reminds us, first the truth must be set free. And we may contrast the treatment of Edward Snowden with that given to General David Petraeus, who revealed government secrets simply to lubricate his adultery. Not only that, when the snoopers sling the word traitor, they also point to something they call the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. I'll say more about this, but it's not a court. Courts hear both sides. They have a public jurisprudence. And this apparatus of snoopery rests on fear. We're told to accept it because we're afraid. Afraid of what? Basically, of ethnic violence in and from the Middle East. That's the problem the snoopers tell us that they can solve. Well, I say nonsense. How about starting closer to home? Why don't we address the problem of ethnic violence in the Middle West? And then, if we could get that under control and make the lives of people of color matter there, Then we could kind of work outwards. You see, now next door in Utah, you are more likely to be killed by a cop than by gang violence or child abuse. Being killed by a cop is the second most prevalent kind of homicide in Utah. What's the first? Well, let me say, if you're married and it's not going well, watch out. I mean, guys, you know, you can tell a lot about how a woman's feeling by looking at her hands. If she's holding a gun, she's probably angry. Now remember, so to come to our theme, remember what Justice Jackson said in Brenninger versus United States, he having just come back from his service on the Nuremberg Tribunal? Uncontrolled search and seizure is one of the first and most effective weapons in the arsenal of every arbitrary government. But the right to be secure against searches and seizures is one of the most difficult to protect, since the officers are themselves the chief invaders. There is no enforcement outside of court. So you and I have the means to address these issues. More than that, we have the duty to do it. The NSA's bulk collection of personal communications predictably and inevitably leads to the use of that information as the basis for jailing and prosecuting our clients. Civil suits against snooping have met with some success, but they face the government's assertion of state secrets and political questions. We run the risk of getting involved in discovery disputes. No, the frontier of the battle is where it's always been. Government levels a charge against our client, and we have the power and the duty to inquire how they got the evidence. This is not, as we know, saying that our client must be guilty, and we're going to quibble about evidence gathering. The full inquiry into the government's methods often discovers that exculpatory evidence has been hidden, and that the word intelligence is simply a name that's been given to hasty conclusions and unregulated suspicion. The term intelligence, indeed, is simply another example of how language has been hijacked in the service of unaccountable power. I cannot predict how this struggle will come out, but I'm heartened by knowing that within our lifetimes in the law, we have won victories by returning to the constitutional text. Think of Crawford versus Washington and Apprendi versus New Jersey. And so I want to talk about two tools that we have, ways of seeing the law, if you will. Call them weapons, if you like, and imagine yourself as David's wearing only a jock strap with just a slingshot and a rock. Well, two rocks, actually, as we shall see. Our first weapon is the Fourth Amendment definition of a search of persons, houses, papers, and effects, which must not be unreasonable and is presumptively governed by a warrant based on probable cause. For nearly 50 years, since Katz against the United States, the Supreme Court has recognized that the new instruments of search and seizure do not destroy the old-fashioned Fourth Amendment protection. That protection was conceived in the shadow of broad-gauge searches of political dissidents, as we know from the old cases of Entick versus Carrington and Wilkes versus Wood. And in a nod to my mentor, Edward Bennett Williams, Katz was adumbrated in Silverman versus United States, which held that for Fourth Amendment purposes, penetration, however slight, was, well, you know. It was the British searches under writs of assistance that led John Adams and others to their acts of resistance. James Otis declaimed against arbitrary search, speaking on the Boston Common in 1761, and of that speech, John Adams later wrote, "Then and there was the child independence born." So the Katz holding that the Fourth Amendment protects people, not places, has heralded a series of other decisions. Camara held that the Fourth Amendment applies to administrative searches. Quan held that the Fourth Amendment protection is not limited to searches designed to get evidence for criminal cases. So much for the "we are just gathering intelligence" argument, which is not only a lie, but constitutionally illiterate. The Jardines case applied the Fourth Amendment. By the way, the copy of this will be available tomorrow. Don't take notes. You can, the citations and so on. Jardines applied the Fourth Amendment to drug sniffer dogs around your front porch. Yet in April of this year, Rodriguez versus United States added some more sniffer dog protection. Riley versus California protects the contents of your cell phone. Jones put Fourth Amendment limits on GPS trackers. And just this term, the Supreme Court per curiam reviewed and renewed all this law in Grady versus North Carolina. Tracking is a search no matter where you are tracked. And also this term, the Supreme Court held that warrantless routine searches of hotel registrations are facially invalid under the Fourth Amendment. This case, this is City of Los Angeles versus Patel, is already being used by Google and others to protect internet customer privacy. Now, the Second Circuit has recently given us ACLU versus Clapper. It's an opinion by Judge Gerry Lynch. It's rich in Fourth Amendment lore, even as Judge Lynch disclaims a desire to make constitutional law. The court holds that Section 215 of the Patriot Act cannot validly be the basis for what NSA is doing. If Congress intended that the NSA have such powers that raise such serious Fourth Amendment issues, it must say so without equivocation. This is a judicial technique of avoiding constitutional questions that traces back to cases such as Kent v. Dulles and Good Connect against the United States, which was the first case I ever argued in the Supreme Court. Judge Lynch's opinion does say two things that are very important to the work that we must do. First, he rejects the government's assertion that intelligence gathering is somehow exempt from the Fourth Amendment because the objective, theoretically, is not to provide information for criminal cases. We've heard this argument before. I first argued against it in 1969. It's been rejected over and over, but the government still trots it out, even though it is at bottom a lie, because the gathered information will always be leaked to cops and prosecutors. My mentor, Edward Bennett Williams, said, you know, there's no secret in Washington, there's just a 10-minute head start. So Judge Lynch says no, the Fourth Amendment violation occurs at the moment of the prohibited violation. Second, Judge Lynch rejects the argument that bulk collection does not intrude on the content of conversations, but only on the addresses or phone numbers and the names of what is sent and received. No, the court says, this sort of collection, quote, does proxy, close quote, for content collection. If the government has information that two people who are in regular communication or about a particular email address with certain characteristics, it can and does infer what those people are talking about. And I remember this because that was exactly the argument the government made in a case that I had in the Ninth Circuit 45 years ago, in which a pattern of telephone calls was used by the government at trial to infer what the callers must have been talking about. But the Second Circuit opinion and this line of Supreme Court cases say something that's broader and deeper than what might be suggested by this list. The message here is that this Constitution of ours was designed by people who were not so arrogant as to think that they'd anticipated every detail of every issue that might arise. They were not forging a set of fetters. They knew their words would have to be interpreted to make sense of things in changing times. I know the Congress, as Gerry said, has reworked the law of surveillance. For that, I think, is a so what, a little bit. The fruits of the earlier illegality are still in government hands. And is there anybody in the room who trusts the government to obey the law, whatever the law might be? Is there anybody who believes that if a tool of intrusion is in the government's hands, it won't be used? The Foreign Intelligence Court has already spoken. We are not bound by what the Second Circuit says they have proclaimed. The new law from Congress doesn't bar bulk collection. Things will go on as before. Now, wait a minute. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, as I said, is not a court. A court, that hears arguments on both sides. And then it listens to both sides, and then it's generally open to the public. You know, a buffalo does not become a giraffe by sticking his neck out. You know, it thinks it's a court, right? But what's in a name? Tell you, guy walks into a bar with a duck under his arm. Goes up, sidles up to a good-looking young woman at the bar and says, "Hey, honey, come here often?" And she turns and says, "What the hell do you mean bringing that pig in here?" He says, "No, this is a duck." And she says, "I was talking to the duck." What's in a name? So this court is a creature of the war against terror, TWAT. Now, I understand, but I thought, somebody told me that, and it's offensive. I think that's offensive, and it's biased. So, it is the secret collection and retention of operational terrorism utility material, SCROTUM. Now, I know that the line of Fourth Amendment authority is not unbroken, but we've been given the basic materials with which to strengthen the protection the amendment was designed to provide. You know, like Sisyphus, we keep rolling that rock up the hill. So our first weapon is the text and history and meaning of the Fourth Amendment, not as seen in former times, not as the government sees it in this time, but in a timeless and forward-looking way. The Fourth Amendment is not dead, though the devil's choir of the NSA is trying to sing its requiem. But here's another thought. Many of these cases are about dope dealers, gamblers, and defrauders. But the enduring value of the Fourth Amendment was established in those early precedents about opponents of colonial rule and organizers against tyranny. The right to be free of intrusion is the right of all people in a world filled with injustice to communicate with one another, to understand their circumstances, and to act together in their common interest. That was Justice Jackson's message in Brinegar, brought to us fresh from his experiences at Nuremberg. So these are our truths. How do we set them free? In the defense of criminal cases, the government's claims to secrecy and non-justiciability are at their weakest. Government assertions of the need for secrecy still exercise a powerful influence on judges, as many in this room have learned, at their clients' expense. Our 1970s efforts to force revelation of exculpatory evidence shielded by state secrets claims were met with the Confidential Information Pretrial Procedures Act, SIPA. But you know, Brady and Giglio still exist. They're a powerful counterweight to SIPA. We're speaking, after all, not of one or two, but three constitutional-based rights to obtain information: the due process right to disclosure of exculpatory evidence, the right to confrontation is useless unless we have the information with which to do the confronting. Think Jenks, the case, not just the Jenks Act. And the right to compulsory process means that we can seek and obtain the information that our clients need. Think Chambers against Mississippi and that wonderful article by Peter Weston in the Michigan Law Review. But when we can show that the government has or even may well have relied on illegally obtained evidence, these restrictions on disclosure retreat. The story begins with Learned Hand's opinion in the United States against Copeland. I know you know it, but I want to read some words. To purge the taint of illegal wiretaps, the court held, all the taps must be disclosed. Listen again. Few weapons in the arsenal of freedom are more useful than the power to compel a government to disclose the evidence on which it seeks to forfeit the liberty of its citizens. All governments believe that those they seek to punish are guilty. The impediment of constitutional barriers are galling to all governments when they prevent the consummation of that just purpose. But those barriers were devised and are precious because they prevent that purpose and its pursuit from passing unchallenged by the accused and unpurged by the alembic of public scrutiny and public criticism. A society which has come to wince at such exposure of the methods by which it seeks to impose its will upon its members has already lost the feel of freedom and is on the path towards absolutism. 1950. Huh? 185 F. 2nd, 629. The Supreme Court cited Copeland with approval in Dennis against the United States. Now, this is a dinner talk and not a law review article. If you want a history of the way the judicial power has been exercised in the face of national security claims, look at the notes that'll be in this text tomorrow in my book, Thinking About Terrorism. But the history of judicial independence, of which Learned Hand spoke, dates to the time of John Marshall. Now, some years after Copeland, along came Alderman with its companion case. Some people don't remember this, of Ivanov versus United States. Ivanov was a Soviet citizen. The government had claimed that when it committed an illegality, the department that calls itself justice would review the matter and determine if the illegality was, quote, arguably relevant to the defendant's prosecution. Then and only then would they disclose the information. Well, whoever said that justice should be blind did not mean that the Department of Justice should be blind. And the Supreme Court rejected the government's view, even in the face of dire warnings about mafia killers and Soviet spies. In oral argument, Justice Harlan raised the national security issue. Edward Bennett Williams replied, "If we are driven to the unhappy conclusion that the alleged spy goes free, then I think we can draw some conclusion that in the last 3 decades of recorded federal jurisprudence, during which there were 3 wars, we have only 1 instance of an averred spy going free in this frame of reference, and she was the defendant in the case to which I allude, the Copeland case. And I think," he added, "that we can also get a measure of consolation from the fact that of all the crimes in jurisprudence, espionage has the lowest rate of recidivism of any federal felony." Yes. Here then are some but not all the ways in which we gain access to a place where something worthy of the name justice can be done. Here again is something that Ed Williams told the court in that case. "It is not our argument in this court today that the executive branch should be manacled or impeded or harassed in the conduct of relationships with other governments. It is our argument here today that at least the federal courts should be a sanctuary in the jungle, and that the fruits of this kind of conduct should not become evidence in a criminal case brought by the sovereign power against an accused." Now, I'm not suggesting the Supreme Court or any other courts will honor for sure these constitutional commitments. After all, the court hasn't always done right. Think of such horrors as the Dred Scott case, which Justice Greer said would put in a peaceful end to the slavery debate. Think of the many times judges have abandoned their duty in the face of rumored war and factitious claims of national security. We see the past, but the past is not there to bind us. It is the way over which we have come, and seeing it tells us where we must go. We are arguing before the judges with the support of our colleagues because we have this duty to do so. Our clients are not willingly in those courtrooms. We'll win some battles, and in all of the battles, we'll be painting a public picture of threatened injustice. These tasks that are being discussed tonight are not easy. I'm reminded of what William James said in 1887, dedicating a monument to Robert Gould Shaw. Shaw served in the Civil War bravely, but James celebrated him because Shaw chose to command a regiment of African American soldiers. Military valor in that time, as in this one, was widely celebrated. And as William James said, that lonely kind of courage is the kind of valor to which the monuments of nations should be most of all be reared. For the survival of the fittest has not bred into the bone of human beings as it has bred military valor. And of 500 of us who could storm a battery side by side with others, perhaps not one would be found ready to risk his worldly fortunes all alone in resisting an enthroned abuse. Of course, I look around the room and I know that we're not alone. We stand in a line of advocates and their clients, from Andrew Hamilton in the Zenger case to James Otis in 1761, to David Paul Brown representing workers, to Lord Brougham, to Darrow, to Clara Foltz, and beyond. They stood up for justice. How can we stand down? The movement doesn't need everybody, but it always needs somebody. The struggle is a relay race, and the baton's been passed for us. We have to carry it and look out for who will take it when our part of the race is run. So if you share that hope and that fragile faith, take out a piece of paper and a pen and write your name and the amount that you're going to give to the Foundation for Criminal Justice, and hand that paper to someone at your table who collect your responses. Because even Hamlet, confused as he was, recognized that these battles cannot be fought alone. He said this, "The time is out of joint, O cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right. Nay, come, let's go together." Thank you.
Good evening. I said good evening. Are you having a good time? Now, I do have some prepared remarks, but like any good lawyer, it's probably good or you'll get yourself in a lot of trouble by going off script. I had the distinct pleasure and honor of sitting next to Michael Tiger. And I realized I was going to have to speak after him. And it reminded me of another occasion, because he told me he saw James Brosnahan. I'm sure you all know James Brosnahan, who apparently is in town, a great lawyer. I think he's going to present tomorrow or someday. And I had to follow James Brosnahan speak after he was in the throes of the John Walker Lynn case. You remember that case, the American Taliban. So when I took the podium, there was really only one thing to do. And it's the same thing I have to do tonight because of Michael. It reminds me of an old adage, be brief. That's impossible. It's a hard act to follow, but we're going to give it a go. And thank you, Michael. But now it's time for the Jew boys. Better than that, you may not know, but Peter and I have a few things in common. Besides being Jewish, we're both from New York and are transplanted Philadelphians. But tonight is more about Peter. So first, I really want to welcome you. It truly is heartwarming to see this widespread support by and for you, truly Liberty's last champions. And while I don't want to make this overly interactive, I would say all of you to raise your glasses for each other. There's a lot to celebrate, and you are it. Before I get into the important part of the evening, the Robert C. Heaney Memorial Award, I do have a few housekeeping remarks to make and a few preliminary remarks. First, at the outset, I wanted to thank, believe it or not, the Department of Justice, through the Bureau of Justice Assistance and our longtime partner in many common criminal justice initiatives, Koch Industries, for their support enabling NACDL to award at least 24 scholarships for lawyers working in public defense to attend tonight's program. So I thank DOJ, notwithstanding Michael's remarks, and of course Koch Industries. Thank you. I'd also like to thank the so many private and public and foundations that support the Foundation for Criminal Justice all year. And if it's not obvious, we truly are a big tent. Second, I want to acknowledge another wonderful group. I'm sure you well know that the Foundation for Criminal Justice supports NACDL's unparalleled amicus program. Over the last year, 78 individuals contributed to briefs amounting to some 33, 36 cases in the U.S. Supreme Court, the Federal Circuit, and other federal and state courts throughout the country. So I ask you, if you are a chair, co-chair, or you have ever worked on an amicus brief, I ask you at this time to rise and accept the thanks that you truly deserve. But of course, there are a lot more thank yous to come. And I'm very, very happy about that. I start by saying I wish every president can and perhaps will bookend their term with an annual gala like this for an incredible celebration. Even better, with not one, but two very successful programs. Just like tonight, I tell you, it feels like deja vu all over again. Thank you. And I have to ask, I get a little presidential prerogative as the clock is running down. How many here were in Philadelphia when we filled the halls of the National Constitution Center? A little sign of hands. A pretty good amount. Well, that's great. But the better question is, how many of you will attend the next gala? And I sure hope it's all of you, and you bring your friends too. Lisa rightfully has thanked the gala committee. But in my role, not just as a committee member, but in my capacity, and I am happy to say this, as president of the greatest bar in the United States, I have something to say to the staff. First, we certainly could not do this without the staff. But more than that, I would ask the staff, and I know you're situated all over the room, to rise. The staff of NACDL, where are you? Norman? And in part of doing the work for the gala tonight, but much, much, much more so, you learn as president of this wonderful organization. As I wrote in the journal, staff, with my unending appreciation, respect, and deep admiration, love you, thank you, simply none better. They deserve an applause. And that is no bullshit. Now, I know Lisa, and I second Lisa's request to look on the table. And I hope this evening has moved you. I hope you've had a few liberating drinks. Perhaps you can see more clearly now. You have a vision. You can see the mountaintop. And if you want to really make a bigger difference, reach for that envelope. It will pay dividends. I hope you think about it and better do it. And now to the meat of the program, the Heaney. Tonight, we celebrate the past and the present, but we look forward to the promise of the future. More members, more money, more galas, more help, more assistance, more training, more caring, more change, and most of all, more Peter Goldbergers. Peter, as you all know, has had an incredible career. And it would take too long to get into it. And please read the wonderful bio in the journal. But let me say a couple of things. First of all, Peter, as you know, was a law school graduate. That's true, you were a law school graduate. A Yale Law School graduate. He also clerked for the late, great district court and later chief judge and mentor to both of us of the Third Circuit, Judge Edward Becker, and I know he's looking down on you with a big smile. And his wonderful wife, Judge Flora Becker, has already written a beautiful note celebrating your award. But that's not the only person in the judiciary that has something to say or would say about Peter. I really wasn't going to start with anecdotes because, we'd all get in trouble. But not too long ago, I had the good occasion to meet Justice Alito. And I knew Justice Alito was a classmate of Peter's. And I thought it would be an appropriate way when I met the justice to say, I introduced myself, and I said, I'm a friend of Peter Goldberger, and I understand you two were classmates. And Peter tells me you were the smartest guy, woman, in the class. And he looked down at me without missing a beat, and he said, Peter is always right. We know that. But he's wrong here because Peter was the smartest guy in the class. Well, that's not a bad endorsement. It's not Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but it's not chopped liver. But Peter went on to become a federal public defender, a law professor, you may not know this, for 6 years. And of course, we all well know he's a preeminent expert on post-conviction sentencing and appeal with countless victories and great results. He also, as his bio indicates, was a board member of both the Philadelphia and Pennsylvania ACLUs. And in the course of my duties of trying to raise support, I reached out to the ACLU. Our journal at that point was filled to the brim. But in speaking about Peter and their love of Peter, they were willing to say something and make a wonderful contribution. And I promised them that I would give them a shout out. And I am giving the ACLU a special shout out because of what they say about Peter. You are a true champion of liberty and a tireless advocate for justice. We greatly appreciate your many years of commitment and service to ACLU. Your friends and colleagues at the ACLU of Pennsylvania. Now, as for NACDL, his service, as you all know, is incalculable. It's not quantifiable. Even Einstein would not be able to come up with an equation to figure out the benefit that Peter has provided to NACDL. He's a perennial vice chair of the Amicus Committee, author of numerous amicus briefs, co-chair of the Rules Committee, and he's dedicated himself to endless task forces, including the Discovery Task Force. He's our representative to the ALI. He's our representative to the Federal Judicial Conference. And in general, as we all know, he is our everyday legal resource. Peter. Now, bringing you back a year ago, you may recall my inaugural remarks when I spoke about the work that we are in. We are in the saving business, the amazing business, and most of all, we are in the love business. And I say that because Peter perfectly epitomizes all three. He certainly won a lot of cases, he saved a lot of people, and he really cares, and he shows it every day. And the Heaney Award, as you know, it's our most prestigious award. It is given to a lawyer in recognition of their service to the bar and to NACDL. It is the prerogative of the president, and I was thinking about this award ever since I was installed. And we certainly have a lot of worthwhile candidates, some obvious, some not so obvious, but none, absolutely none, more deserving than Peter Goldberger. I haven't even gotten verklempt yet. Peter has demonstrated a wide-ranging and unparalleled commitment to NACDL, to the cause of criminal justice and to civil liberties. In addition to fiercely and tirelessly advocating for his clients, he routinely and generously shares his considerable knowledge and talent with the entire defense bar, effectively ensuring we all are better lawyers and inevitably achieving better results. And while my days are winding down, I still have the ability to pass a couple of proclamations, and I am ordaining the following. You like it, Anna, right? Anna Durbin, we love you. So, that ordination, we will create a new membership brochure. You know about the membership brochure, but this new one is going to list Peter Goldberger as a membership benefit, and the members will benefit. And the second is that we're going to assure and obtain from all 50 states, a guarantee and authorization of CLA credit for all NACDL members that read Peter's responses on the listserv. And more so, in the rare instance when Peter actually asks a question, and if he gets a favorable answer, that person will get double credit. So, as I begin to close, in the course of being president, one does a lot of things, and many bring great joy. But this is one of those beyond belief. I know you know Peter is my friend. In fact, for decades. But I didn't choose Peter because he is my friend. But I, like you, are so pleased that he is. Very simply, he is a very good lawyer, a very good person, and a very good friend to NACDL and to all of us for a very long time. So Peter, and with this award, NACDL thanks you for your tireless work on behalf of the profession, on behalf of all criminal defense lawyers and clients, yours and so many others that you have helped. I am so pleased and proud to present to you this year's Robert C. Heaney Memorial Award, an honor and recognition the defense community uniformly and joyfully regards as richly and well-deserved. I give you Philadelphia lawyer Peter Goldberger.
Sometimes the light's all shining on me. Other times I can barely see. Lately, it occurs to me what a long, strange trip it's been. Thank you, Ted, for choosing me for this high honor, which means so much to me as it's given in the name of an organization that I hold in such high esteem. Thank you for finding nice things to say about me in your introduction. To be put in the company of the past winners of the Robert C. Heaney Memorial Award is humbling. In fact, it's almost overwhelming. I looked at the list of the 34 previous winners, page 9 of your program. I realized that I knew all but 2 of them. I see individuals on that list whom I have admired, learned from, tried in one way or another to emulate throughout my career. I probably had been a member of NACDL for about 5 years, it seems to me, before I attended my first annual meeting. That was in Boston in 1988. Ephraim Margolin was sworn in as president at that meeting. And I still remember how moved and inspired I was by his remarks, how energized I was by the large number and variety of criminal defense lawyers from all over the United States that I met there for the first time. I must have known in the abstract about who were NACDL members, but seeing people at the meeting had such an impact on me. People I met there for the first time, all dedicated to the common goals of helping one another to improve the professional quality and ethical foundations of the services they were providing to their clients. They were public defenders, private lawyers, young, old, men and women from small towns and big cities, specialists in juvenile cases, capital cases, white-collar cases, organized crime, drug conspiracies, DUI, and misdemeanors. Lawyers whose clients were poor, lawyers most of whose clients were rich and powerful, yet all were coming together around this common goal of becoming better at trying to fulfill the promise of the Sixth Amendment throughout our land. I realized then and there, July 1988, that I wanted to be part of this project for the rest of my career, and that's what I did. At that time, I had been in private practice a little more than a year. I had the crazy idea of running a criminal appellate practice, mostly federal because that's what I knew from my clerkship and federal public defender experience. I figured that most real criminal defense lawyers, like most of you, unlike me, loved trials and disliked appeals. So I figured maybe I could get referrals. I hoped that in a specialized area with relatively little competition, I could develop my expertise and hopefully a bit of a reputation. In that way, I figured I might manage to land enough well-paying cases that I could meet a personal goal of taking 20 to 25% of my cases pro bono, or low bono, what we sometimes call semi-pro bono, including in that percentage the time that I spend with NACDL and FAM and ACLU activities. And I have pretty much kept to that plan. I've been able to keep to that plan for the last quarter century or more. Several of my most satisfying cases have come on court appointments, including a death row DNA exoneration, a junk arson science exoneration, and my one argument before the US Supreme Court. During nearly all of that time, I have had the support and assistance of one associate, NACDL member Pamela Wilk, who is an integral and essential part of my practice. And I have also had, throughout my career, the critical support, and I mean critical in every sense, and inexplicable tolerance of Anna Durbin, my wife, my life partner, an active NACDL member. Anna is the most sensitive, compassionate, and sensible human being I have ever known, not to mention one of the best lawyers. Anna and I met in the federal prison clinic in law school, and I have loved her for more than 40 years. And I'm so happy that she's here tonight, sitting with one of our 3 brilliant daughters, Nora, who works here in Denver for Planned Parenthood, and with our terrific soon-to-be son-in-law, A.J. Hawks. It seems, I wish I could agree with Martin Luther King about the arc of justice. Sometimes it seems more like a pendulum. But the pendulum does swing, and it swings slowly from reason and compassion to cruelty and repression, and then back again. Over-incarceration, over-criminalization have been the watchwords for too long. Through my volunteer work for NACDL and others, I have tried to do my small part in our collective effort to change those policies. But most of what we do as criminal defense lawyers is not on the level of policy. Necessarily, we defend our clients one at a time. We do that because we believe in 2 things. One of those things is political. The other is spiritual. First, we share the vision of our Constitution, that guarantees of individual rights are a critical bulwark against tyranny, and that criminal defense lawyers are essential to the protection of liberty. But we defend our clients one at a time for a second reason as well, simply because they are individual human beings, and they are entitled to be treated as such. They are entitled to have someone looking for the good in them instead of focusing on their worst behavior, and bringing that humanity into the light when society seeks only to condemn them. We are proud to do this for the innocent, for the wrongly accused, for the overcharged, and also for the occasional client who may be guilty. This is my life's calling. It's also the cause of NACDL. For this reason, I am so glad to be here with you tonight, and I am honored to accept the Robert C. Heaney Award.